a podcast about amazing people from an incredible state. Join Mike Broomhead for Amazing Arizonans, presented by Resolution Copper. Copper is essential to Arizona's economy and to America's future. Learn more at resolutioncopper.com.
Another episode of Amazing Arizonans, and I think you're going to really enjoy this story. His name is Brad Blakeman, and I really don't even know how to introduce you. I mean, you've been involved in a couple of different presidential administrations. You've worked in American politics. You've worked in a public policy, and now you're with Tunnel to Tower. So right. What is the official introduction? What is it that you are known for?
It's all the above. I mean, public service, I think, is the hallmark of my career, is being able to serve both in the public and private sectors. But I think the majority of my professional life has been in the public sector.
What was it like? I volunteered for George W. Bush's re-election campaign in 2004 and was connected just in the election part of things from a volunteer basis, traveling around and speaking on the campaign's behalf. But what's it like working? Because you worked for his father as well, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I started with Ronald Reagan out of college.
So what did you do in the Reagan administration?
Believe it or not, I started as a motorcade driver. I drove in the motorcade for Governor Reagan when he was running for president. A lot of volunteers volunteer everything from delivering literature to being in the motorcade to setting up sites. So my brother was involved out here at Arizona through Arizona State when he went to ASU, and they needed a motorcade driver, so there I was. And then I did that a couple of times, and then they asked me if I would travel during the campaign. And then when George Bush Sr. became the vice presidential nominee, I went over to his shop and then traveled with him. We won 8 years with him in the White House as vice president, 4 years as president.
What is it like working for an administration? We all guess what it's like, but what is it like to work in the administration and kind of be in that inner circle?
Well, it was fascinating for me because I got to travel. That was setting up major media events all over the world. So I would literally travel all over the country in advance of the vice president or the president, setting up their sites. But your ear would be to the ground because you're where the people are. Mm-hmm. You're outside the Beltway. Whether it's a foreign trip, you're getting the culture and the history, also the politics of the country you're visiting. Same thing here, stateside. You'd go to Phoenix and you'd learn all the issues that are happening in Phoenix in literally 7 days. And you'd be talking to the people and find out what's on their mind and then how best to communicate that through the events that we did for the vice president.
One of the things that surprised me, and I don't know if it ever surprised you, was the vitriol from the opposition. I never thought when I would go to campaign events and speak and see the protesters and the opposition, and the hate is the only word I can think of. I've disagreed politically. I've been politically inclined most of my life. I have strong opinions about things, but I've never felt a level of disdain or hatred. But it is palpable, isn't it?
Especially today. I mean, I don't recognize today's political environment from the environment I stood out with as a volunteer and then being fortunate enough to come to the White House. I've never seen the kind of divisiveness, and hatred is a good word, that I've seen for political opponents, for opposition. There's no tolerance anymore. There's no discussion. It's either, somebody's way or the highway. And it's a sad period in our country.
But as someone, you were a professor at Georgetown, correct?
I was, yeah.
So as a professor, you're teaching public policy and you're teaching the next generation of people that'll make those policies. But you're also been an outspoken person as well. You've been asked to be frequent guest in cable news. So you, a lot like me, you've been asked to come out and give your opinion. So you see it when it happens. I just don't know how we got to the level of, if I disagree with you, you're not just wrong, you're evil. How do we get there?
I don't know. I think it's tribalism. I think the internet has a lot to do with it because people have found their niche and their cliques, and they haven't been willing, maybe, or able to see the big picture and look at other sites that maybe disagree with them. I did that as part of my profession. I always wanted to know what the opposition was into. When I taught at Georgetown, I made it clear to my students, I'm not here to indoctrinate. I'm here to educate. And if you come to my office hours, I'll talk politics, but I don't do it in the classroom. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of professors out there that have that same ideology. They're looking for converts.
Right.
And it's a captive audience. And I think that's really been part of the problem in America is the educational institution of indoctrination at the high school now level. We're seeing it now with the issues of transgenders competing against biological sexes. It's a time of very deep division in our country.
And it's the division for me. I think it's been there to some degree, but I guess what bothers me about it is it takes away the best part of it, which is the debate.
Right.
Some of my closest friends, we disagree vehemently politically, but there's never a level of disrespect. Right. And sometimes I used to think, well, that's because we know each other. But if you go back and you look at the old Reagan debates, when he debated Mondale, when you look at some of the things that were said, and he would use humor,
right.
But it wasn't just his side of the aisle that laughed at the humor. Everybody got the joke and laughed. Even Mondale laughed.
Sure.
So there was a time where we came to the table with strong opinions, but we would recognize when somebody made a valid point, and somehow it seems like we're losing that.
Right. And compromise has become a 4-letter word in America. You have to compromise in every facet of your life, whether it's your personal life, whether it's your business life. Yet in politics, compromise is wrong. Meeting of the minds is, not accepted. I met my business partner in Washington debating him on television. We'd knock the crap out of each other on MSNBC or Fox, and then we'd shake hands, we'd go out for a meal, and then we finally put our heads together and say, you know what, we can make some money doing this. And we represented clients. He represented the Democratic side of an issue. I took the Republican side of an issue. But we were friends. We respected each other. In some instances with our clients, I took the lead. In some instances, he did. And America's got to get back to that because compromise is an essential part of life. And we have to do it on all levels. And with compromise comes respect, because you have to respect the other side to have a meeting of the minds.
So do you think that at our core, we are still that way, and we've just allowed the shrill voices to be heard more, or they're the only voices that make it? Or do you think that we have gotten away from it and we need to get back to it?
No, we need to get back to it. We're not forever changed, but life is cyclical. And right now we're in a bad time, a cycle of tolerance and respect for one another, and we got to get back to that. And the only way you get back to that is through the leaders and the influencers out there who are willing to do that. And America, when you get to outside the Beltway, that's the real people.
Right.
I travel a lot for Tunnel to Towers, and I see the real people every time I go to a village or a town and listen to the people, what's on their minds, what they're most interested in. And one of the things that they're not interested in is the kind of static you're getting from Washington.
Well, an example of that is when the VA scandal broke. It broke here in Arizona first. And I was working in radio, and I wanted to do something about it. And one of the first people that reached out to me was Senator McCain's office and said, we'll do whatever it takes. Let's get some eyes on this. And we started working on this together. But in the end, it was John McCain and Bernie Sanders that brokered the choice card and got that deal through the United States Senate. And back then it showed me, I think, that there are still some basic things like care of veterans that both sides agree on, and they were willing to show it, because I don't think either side, I think both sides are afraid to tell their base we're going to compromise. Right. The base is the one that gets angry. Am I right? Do you think?
Sure, yeah, but the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and not necessarily the squeak of the wheel represents the entire bicycle. So I think what we have to understand is who's actually speaking for the quote-unquote people. When I hear people I'm representing, well, they only represent themselves.
Right.
They're not representing, they don't have a constituency. They weren't elected to anything. And a lot of the talking heads, if you look at their bios, their CVs, they have no actual experience.
Correct.
So they weren't elected to anything. They didn't serve on anything. They didn't give back to the community. Yet all of a sudden they become experts. And by the way, they're paid millions and millions of dollars to be a talking head. But when you look behind the curtain, there's nothing there.
So is that, will love your perspective on this. Is that our fault in the media?
It is. It is. The media is a big problem. They're not. They could be a solution, but they're a problem. We're seeing it today with Joe Biden's health. I could see it. I'm no doctor, but I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And when somebody walks me outside and said the sky is red, isn't this sky red? I go, no, it's actually blue. No, it's red. And then you realize that what we're being told is absolutely 100% false. Yet they keep telling us it. And then when it's exposed, what do? They write a book about how evil the administration was.
Right.
Yet they were the ones who were parroting it.
Right, and they were either, if not overtly shielding it, they certainly weren't asking the questions.
100%.
What I also, and I would love to know what your thoughts are. I love the industry I'm in. I love the radio industry. But doing this podcast, we have a specific intent, and it's Arizona Stories, because you're a Scottsdale resident now, right?
I'm a Scottsdale resident, yes.
But it is the world we live in now. When you look at people like a Bill O'Reilly, a Chris Cuomo, people, Megyn Kelly, Joe Rogan, who have gone outside of the confines of cable news and are doing these projects where they are more not center in their beliefs, but more honest in their opinions. When you look at what Bill Maher had to say about his dinner with Donald Trump, when you look at those people, that looks to me to be more like classic journalism as we remember it than what we're seeing today.
Well, these people are unshackled. Remember, all the people you mentioned at one time were tied to a network.
Right.
Once they break free from that environment, contractually and otherwise, they're free to speak their minds. Well, why weren't they free to speak their minds at the places of their employment?
Right.
All of a sudden, they become free spirits. They become truth tellers. So, I take that with a grain of salt as well.
Do you think that as before, outside of traditional media, whatever you want to call it, mainstream media, traditional media, outside of those for a long time, anything outside of theirs was seen as fringe. But do you believe that at some point networks have got to start taking lessons from some of these people that are just having millions and millions of followers and financial success by telling the truth?
Absolutely. Just look, as you say, when they're unshackled, look at the kind of response they get. Look at the audience they get. Look at the people they're reaching. So, you have to me, it's very simple. Tell the truth and report the news.
Right.
Don't tell me how to think. Give me the tools in which I can make a decision. But I don't need constant editorialization of your opinion. Tell me the facts. We can figure it out. When jurors go in on the most complicated cases in our country, they're not experts.
Right.
Yet they solve the most complex issues as being, volunteers, number one, but two, naive to the issue. They never knew about a lot of the court cases that confront them, whether it's criminal or civil. Yet in our system, we know that the American people are smart people. Give them the facts and let them make their own informed decision.
Going back to your point about education, I think that's the biggest disservice in education, that if we start with young children and we teach them to read and comprehend what they're reading at a third grade level, if we teach them those basic skills, they have the ability to learn for the rest of their lives, and they will figure it out for themselves instead of us trying to tell them what to think. If we teach them how to think, and that's been classically what's been the greatest part of America.
It is, and that's what sets us apart from every other nation. Is the trouble is we're dumbing down our schools. We're our kids are not free thinkers. All they need to do is repeat it back.
Yeah.
That's not education.
No.
So what we need to do is we need to get back to basics. We need to and be very competitive. We're living in a really small world now. I just came back on a trip for the White House. I was in India. I was in the UAE. I was in Italy. I was in Ireland. And when you see how small the world has become, it makes us even more competitive on the world stage. And it starts, as you point out, with children. If our children aren't able to compete with others, then our country's not going to be competitive. And that's one thing Donald Trump is now making a priority, is education. But education at the local level. Our property taxes, I don't have kids, but I look at my property tax, 85, 90% of my tax is school tax.
Right.
Why is Washington telling my school district how to educate kids when those dollars are going directly from my household to my school district, not to the state?
Mm-hmm.
So parents have to become more involved at the state and local level because that's where their kids are most affected. And Donald Trump is right. get the government, U.S. government, out of our classrooms.
Even if they were well-intentioned, and I'm going to give them every benefit of the doubt, being well-intentioned, if we just take the state of Arizona and we say, look at the diversity in issues in education between South Phoenix and Scottsdale, between the densely urban area of the valley and the rural parts of the White Mountains, the tribal lands. We have such diverse issues where locally they're better equipped to deal with them because they know the issues. Right. Well, if that's the case just in the state of Arizona, why are we going to do it the same in Massachusetts as we do here or other places? That's the part that frustrates me. Yeah. Well-intentioned as you might be, the solution is not going to be done by one size fits all.
Correct. We're a homogeneous country in the sense that we have common values, but we're as different can be by choice. And that's the beauty of America. We're a melting pot. Arizona is different than Massachusetts, than New York, than California and Florida. And they should be attuned to their own constituency, their own citizens, the ones that pay their bills.
And isn't it interesting that of all places, the lesson that you're talking about is being taught by the state of Mississippi, who has classically been lagging far behind it, in education. But they went back to a phonics-based learning system. They went back to the very basics, and they are showing results that are the envy of the entire nation in a state that classically was last in education.
Right. Well, they're learning.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that's a great thing, and we should applaud that. But Arizona, we compete, as we should, amongst our different school districts, because that's what makes our state better. And then our state competes against other states in our union, and then our union competes against the world. And that's what we got to understand is our competition is just not in our neighborhoods. Your kids just can't be smart in your neighborhoods because a lot of people are not going to stay in Arizona. They're going to go elsewhere. So we want to be proud of the fact that they were well educated in Arizona.
And I love the fact moving here. I've been here for 30 years, but I still have family where I grew up in Southwest Florida. But I've never been to a place, with the exception of Texas, where the state and the natives of that state are so deeply proud of their roots and their heritage and the history of their state. And I think that's something that I wish all 50 states had, that we are a loosely knit nation of 50 individual states. We don't want to be California, but California shouldn't want to be us.
Correct.
And that independent feeling of we have our individual identity, it seems like we're losing that in a lot of ways. And I don't know that the founders of this nation designed it that way.
No, they designed it so that we have the diversity of culture and custom. That's what makes us a great nation. And we should all be proud to teach others about our culture. And we want to learn from them, as you pointed out with Mississippi, best practices. But it's not going to come from the federal government top down. It's going to come from the bottom up because that's where the kids are learning. They're learning in the schools within their district.
And it's funny, this is not the direction I thought any of this conversation would go, which is why I love these podcasts. But I'd love your opinion. You just talked about the trips you made to other nations. But if you look at Europe, what Europe has done, obviously each nation with its cultures and language and governments, what they haven't accomplished is the financial or business unity of the United States. But what we haven't done is allowed for the cultural individuality. Do you think we have a better chance of getting to that individuality, or that they're going to get better at the monetary or financial unity?
Well, in our country, we have to decentralize, in my opinion. We have to get away from the federal government, one size fits all, and get back to the diversity of our 50 states. And that's where the culture and the history and the education comes in. As far as competitiveness, America is the most competitive nation and most successful nation the world has ever known. That's a fact.
Yep.
That's not hyperbole. That's not bragging. That's the way it is. And the reason is because of our diversity and our people. I taught a course in Georgetown about China. And I said, unless you can accept failure as a product of success, you'll never be a great nation. And I gave them a test. I said, you have to tell me where the 13 greatest inventions came from in the last 160 years. The long and short of it is every 7.25 years in the last 160 years, we've had a great invention that changed the world, whether it's the airline, whether it's the internet, whether it's the atomic power, whether it's the airplane, electricity. It all came from America. 7.25 years, we had a great invention. But we don't keep it for ourselves. We give it to the world because we
Right.
monetize it back. But they don't get the fact of our success is our people. It's our work ethic. It's the ability to fail and rise again. And China and Russia will never get that. They're makers, takers, and fakers. They make our products, take our products, and fake our products. That's what they do.
Right.
And unless your culture change and your work ethic changes and your political environment changes, you can never be a great nation. You can be a troublemaker for sure.
Right.
But you're not going to be America. And our greatness isn't. We can't buy and sell that.
Right.
You can't give me $1 trillion and I can't make you America for $1 trillion. That's the beauty of it. It's ingrained in our system. It's ingrained in our people. So as long as we keep that going, America is going to be, a leader in the world for a long time coming.
And I also, to go a step further, is I think it's because we also take like-minded people from all over the world
Right.
that realize they can achieve what they want to achieve where they are. I mean, how much would it take for you to say, I'm going to renounce the citizenship of the nation of my birth and I'm going to go be a citizen somewhere else, and yet the entire world wants to do that? Our immigration problem is actually a good problem of that they know that what they want to accomplish is accomplished here and not in those other countries.
Correct. But immigration has got to be orderly.
Yes.
It's got to be legal. It's got to be wanted. When I visit my neighbor's house, I don't hop their wall. I ring their doorbell.
Right.
And that's the difference is if you start your citizenship in America by breaking our laws, you're not a citizen.
Right.
But that's to say our laws too have to be modernized, and we have to be more compassionate in the way we seek people and have people come in. You just can't throw open the gates and expect people not to come, like the prior administration did, in my opinion.
Right.
You open the floodgates, people are going to come.
Right.
And then guess what? We're going to have to support them. And it's a drain on our school systems, our hospitals, our social services, and it's not fair to the taxpayer. Why should our kids have to suffer by the expense of others who first act is to break our laws?
Well, and we've also seen a change in the American sentiment toward the immigrant.
Right.
And that's, I think, much to our demise in a way, that if we start changing our sentiment toward legal immigration, that's a big problem, because it's immigrants that the positive side of immigration is they do bring a work ethic and a desire for Americanism and a patriotism a lot of times because of the new start that you don't see in a lot of people that are born here. And I think that new blood and that new feeling is a big asset to our country.
Yeah, it's an evil byproduct.
Sure.
Of immigration is now when first thing I thought about immigration is illegal immigration. We don't think of the positivity of
Right.
the great people who have come to America as immigrants who've made this country the country we are. We're a country of immigrants, but we're a country of legal immigration. And there's a process and an order. You must respect the country you're coming to. You must want to come here for the right reasons. And by the way, we have to accept you.
Right.
There are plenty of golf courses I want to golf here, but I can't show up. You know why? Because I'm not a member.
Right.
And if I hop their wall, I'm going to jail.
Right.
So everybody's got to respect one another. And when that happens, great things happen.
And when you feel as if you've earned it. And I have
Right.
so many friends that are families where I grew up and that are immigrants to this country that feel as if it's such an accomplishment to be an American. They cherish it. And they are more patriotic than a lot of Americans I know. And I think it's because they feel as if they've earned it and that it's something that they paid a heavy price for, and they did. And I think that's one of the things that hopefully we're going to get back to, that it's not seen that immigrants to this country are less than, but that illegal immigrants to this country are an asset. And I hope we get back to that feeling.
Me too.
So let me ask about the different the administrations you've been in. What are the differences and the commonalities in the different people you've worked for, whether it's being around Ronald Reagan, being around George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, or even now with the Trump administration? What are the commonalities in all the people you've been with, and what are some of the differences?
The commonalities are that the office of the president is pretty much structured in what you can do, what you can't do by the Constitution and the executive branch. The differences, of course, is the personalities and what they bring to the office. Ronald Reagan, I was very young. I was 22 outside of college and a volunteer. So, and now Mike Reagan, his son, and I are very good friends through Tunnel to Towers. But Ronald Reagan was central casting, literally. I mean, he was someone who looked the part. When you looked at him, that's the president. And well respected, as you pointed out before. He got the joke. It was like the Coyote and the Roadrunner.
Yeah.
At 5 o'clock, Tip O'Neill and him shook hands.
Yep.
There was no vitriol. There was no name calling. So Ronald Reagan was like the gold standard for me. And then Father Bush, he had held so many positions inside and outside of government. He was one of the youngest fighter pilots in World War II, CIA director, RNC chair. I mean, vice president, president. He was amazing in his ability to grasp government from the get-go because he had all that experience, and unflappable. And then George W. Had the ability to have a father who was a vice president. So he didn't have the learning curve that others did. And he brought a lot of those people back when he served. I was in the White House on 9/11. My nephew was a first responder, was killed in the South Tower. So, I mean, I was there when we really tested. And I saw the leadership. I saw him rise to the occasion of leading our country through a really difficult time. And Donald Trump, I've known since '89 when I was practicing law in New York. He's a character. He's an amazing guy. Nobody's ever left a meeting with Donald Trump going, God, I wonder what he meant.
Right.
He knew exactly what he meant. And he is so, unleashed in the fact that, he's not bound by protocol. He's not bound by politics. He's a problem solver. He doesn't want to hear the 10 ways things can't get done. Tell me the one way it will. Either you're going to be with me or against me, but let's move. And he moves at warp speed. And, Washington is a town of thinkers. They'll think forever. And, we need more doers. And he's a disruptor, which is a good thing. Every once in a while, you need to shake things up. So Donald Trump, I think, is going to be more successful in this term than had he had back-to-back terms. Because now he's not having to face another election. He's got 2 years of absolute power, and he's getting things done.
When you look, though, at history, Ronald Reagan, I went back during the 2004 election cycle. I lost a brother in Iraq, so I'm emotionally connected to that as well. And I looked at what was being said about George W. Bush, and it was cowboy. It was going to get us into World War III. He should be near the nuclear codes. And I went back and looked at what was said about Reagan in the Cold War. Yeah. And the exact same things were said about Ronald Reagan. And how dare you say to Gorbachev, let me tell you why we distrust you, and walk out of meetings, and you're going to, you're starting World War III. The point is, history seems to be much kinder to presidents than when they're in the middle of the fight. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Do you think that will be the same way for Donald Trump, that at the end of this, as much of a disruptor as he is, do you think history will be much more kind to him than he's being treated right now?
Well, here's what I said to President Trump. I said, history will judge you as one of the greats. No leader is ever appreciated in their time. It doesn't happen. Yeah. It's only through time, through history, you can go back and say, wait, now I see.
Not even Jesus. I don't want to make that. I'm not making the comparison.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, great leaders always act beyond their tenure.
Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes, always looking beyond, whether it's life or tenure. Ronald Reagan, he took down the Soviet Union without a shot. And I saw the benefit of that when Father Bush became president. And we're going to places that are free, Poland, Lithuania. I'm seeing this firsthand, the wall coming down, the Czech Republic, and seeing the power that Pope John Paul and Reagan had together.
We just were talking about that with the election of an American pope.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I spoke to Gorbachev when W was president. He came to visit. Think about this. The former premier of the Soviet Union is a guest of a president long after his term as friends. So he came early. I talked to him. And I told him, I consider you one of the greatest leaders of our time because you put your country above yourself. I saw what you did. And then I asked him, when Ronald Reagan walked out on you in Iceland, what did you think? He said, you know what? My advisors told me a president would never leave, an American president, without a deal, any deal, because they couldn't face the scrutiny at home. And when Ronald Reagan left, I turned to my advisors and said, now what?
Yeah.
And Ronald Reagan was the first one to call Gorbachev afterwards to say, hey, it didn't work out in Iceland, but let's keep talking. Let's keep moving. And Gorbachev came to America. And Gorbachev saw, never been to America before, saw what others have told him is not true. And that Ronald Reagan wasn't a cowboy. He wasn't looking to start a war. He was looking to make deals that were good for both parties. And Ronald Reagan said, a deal is only as good as it is for me and the other guy. If I get the best end of the deal, the other guy's thinking of how to get out of it. So Ronald Reagan was pragmatic. And, he lost a lot of his career when he was a union president. The very people he was representing and the institutions turned on him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and they say, well, Reagan lead a charmed life. If you look at his life, he really didn't. He lost a child. His industry turned against him. He was relegated to B and C roles, and he rose above all that. And with politics, you have to be pragmatic. And if you're a great leader, like Ronald Reagan and John Paul and others, you're thinking way beyond your own life expectancy.
Isn't the example of that the fact that Gorbachev sat next to Margaret Thatcher at his funeral?
Right. There you go. I mean, it's
remarkable.
It's remarkable. But those leaders are few and far between today. We need to get back to those types of leaders.
Do you think, and this is, again, a theory I have, that going back to, and I don't want to keep belaboring this, but the vitriol and the division we have drives away those good leaders. I still think they exist. I just don't know that they're willing to get into the mud. It's one of the things about Donald Trump that after the first term, then the assassination attempts and these other things, you would ask yourself, why do it? Go live as a billionaire, run your family business with that kind of an attitude. But why would you risk it? Why would anybody that's a good leader want to expose themselves to what it takes to get elected and then the vitriol after?
Right. It's at this time, I wouldn't fault somebody for saying I'm not putting my family through this. And look at Trump. With everything that they threw at him, he should be in an insane asylum.
Yeah.
Because they threw everything that they could possibly have, including almost taking his life. And yet he doesn't go to Mar-a-Lago and say, you know what, it's not worth it.
Right.
He doubles and triples down and says, no, I'm going to finish what I think needs to be done for the good of the American people. I've seen it firsthand.
Do you think there's any validity to some of the criticism about how he does and says things?
Again, I'll go back. He says to me, he says, Brad, you're a Bushy and you love me. I said, Mr. President, there are a lot of Bushies who love you. I said, sometimes it's the way you say it.
I'm one of them.
Yeah. I said, sometimes it's the way you say it. It's not what you do. It's sometimes the way you say it. And he gets a little defensive and he says, no, I've got to do this because my base and we got to rile people up. And so I get it. But when you talk to him individually, he's not the guy at the rally. And his rallies are the most entertaining. Any other politician who speaks more than 20 minutes, people are walking out.
I know.
They're running to their cars. He speaks for 2 hours and people want more. I have never seen somebody speak extemporaneously and as candidly and as openly, and the people want more. We would struggle to raise crowds of 10,000. He'd get 25,000 without any advertising or anything.
Tomorrow.
But, that's Donald Trump. And what I tell politicians who ask for my advice, I said, there's only one Donald Trump. Don't be Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And the ones who try and act like him are cheap imitations because he's so unique.
Well, this is a horrible analogy, but in our business, my business, there was one Rush Limbaugh.
Correct. 100%.
There was one person that could do what Rush did. And there were so many people. When I came into this industry, I didn't know anything about it. And there was no way I was going to be Rush Limbaugh. I'm not. I don't have his depth of knowledge. I certainly don't have his ability to captivate an audience. I just had to be me. But
Right.
I've run into so many people in this industry that's the model and that's what they're going to try to do. And the failure, percentage is huge because there's only one person that can do that.
And the funny thing is, shortly after he passed, that's when you saw people double down to be the next Rush.
Yeah,
And you know what? In people's memory, there's one Rush.
there is.
And don't be Rush. Be yourself. And if you're yourself and you're genuine, you're going to be fabulously successful. But, cheap imitations are cheap. And when people are original, that's what people want. In Rush's past, we honor his memory, but life goes on, and you're going to find that next person. But it's not going to be like Rush. It's going to be like them, whoever they are.
Whoever they are.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the community service aspect of things, because the biggest, I would say the most satisfaction that I get is being able to use the small platform I have to do good. I don't know that there is a more honorable organization in the country than Tunnel to Towers. And I've seen many of them. What is it about that organization that you love so much? And can you explain why it's so successful and why it's the great organization it is?
Well, it's great because the cause is so great. The helping of our heroes. There's a need and there's a desire that these people are not going to be left behind. And Frank Siller, who's our CEO, is the real deal. He started the charity because of the death of his brother, Stephen, who's a FDNY firefighter who finished his shift. He was going home to play golf with his brothers on 9/11. He went through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. He gets to the Brooklyn side. Here's what's going on behind him back in Manhattan at the World Trade Center. He tries to get back through the tunnel with his car. He can't. Leaves his car on the side of the road, takes 63 pounds of gear, runs through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel to the South Tower, and dies saving others. Shortly after his death, his family gets around literally their kitchen table, said, Stephen's not going to die in vain. We got to help those who've been hurt by this, primarily first responders, because he was a first responder. And nickels, dimes, quarters, and dollars around a kitchen table turned into the charity we have today. We have three missions today. Is we pay off the mortgages for fallen first responders and military who leave behind small children. We build smart homes for critically injured military and first responders who get injured in the line of duty. And now we build communities for homeless veterans. The reason why people love us is because we deliver. We underpromise, we overdeliver. 93 cents on the dollar goes to our heroes. We make sure that anybody who's in need and fits our mission gets the help they deserve. And the gratification we get is the thank you that we receive from our heroes. So that's why Tunnel to Towers is successful. It's $11 a month. When people go to t2t.org, we have corporate sponsors and we love them. Home Depot, GMC, Mohawk Carpet, American Express, fabulous corporate sponsors, pales in comparison to the millions of people who give us $11 a month. And they can go to our website and they can see the transparency, who's being helped, how we're spending our money. And, one of the things I did first was go to our headquarters in Staten Island. I'd never been there. I'd met Frank. And I wanted to see exactly where they were. They're in a strip mall in a walk-up. Frank sits in a 12-by-14 office filled with tchotchke. He knows everybody's name. He knows their family. He knows what they do. And everybody there wants to be there. It's not really a job. It's a mission. Mm. And we have the greatest events teams that go out. We have 3,000 events a year. And our annual run in New York is bigger than the Boston Marathon. We have 40,000 runners retake those steps of Stephen Siller through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnels. So Tunnel to Towers is the real deal.
If you don't mind, before we finish, I'd like to get some perspective. I've had so many great perspectives on 9/11. I have two very close friends here. One is a retired FDNY firefighter who his actual last call on duty was the first tower bombing in 93.
Right.
And then he went back after 9/11. Somehow his wife got him back, and he worked for 2 weeks on the rubble during search and rescue. And he was a contractor here in Arizona. And my friend Mike, whose brother was FDNY, similar story. Gotten off of his shift, was going home, grabbed his turnout gear, got in a cab, and perished. He was with Ladder 3 in Manhattan.
Yep. And
his best friend worked for Cantor Fitzgerald in the towers and perished that day. Those unique perspectives. We've had Luis Gonzalez here from the Arizona Diamondbacks who won the World Series that year. The perspective of playing in New York and hearing what it was like. Yeah. From your perspective and the loss your family has suffered and being connected to the Bush administration, what's the perspective of not just that day, but the aftermath of that day?
Well, that day I was a member of President George W. Bush's senior White House staff. So I was the gatekeeper. To get to him, he got to me. I handled all his time. So I had him fully scheduled for 21 days, so we thought. And then he was down in Sarasota, Florida, talking to school children.
Yep.
And
Just north of where I grew up.
Really?
I grew up in Fort Myers.
Okay, stone's throw.
Yep.
And he was advancing his No Child Left Behind education policy. I was back at the White House. We started our day with a senior staff meeting at 7 o'clock in the Roosevelt Room in the West Wing. Typical meeting, 7 to 7:30. We retired to our offices to begin work for the day. I always kept my TV on because I knew outside events could affect the president's schedule, as it did certainly that day. And as I was hearing the reports of the first plane that hit, it was unimaginable to me. I'm from New York. My brother was on the board of the Port Authority, which owned the Trade Center at the time. And I'm listening to the first report, and it's a crystal clear day, and it's not adding up. And then we see in real time the second plane hit. And at that time, I knew America was under attack. I left my desk, I walked down the hall to the Situation Room, went in the Situation Room, thinking they would have some perspective. There's a lag between what you know and what you see. And then there came a time when we were told to evacuate the West Wing. I was responsible for 150 people at an off-site location. They said the plane that the passengers crashed in Shanksville, United Airlines 93, was coming either for the Capitol or the White House. So we continued on the off-site location to work on behalf of the president. As I was working, my sister was calling me because her son, who was a combat-trained Army medic, court officer, blocks from the Trade Center, was unresponsive to her calls. And my brother was calling me as a commissioner of the port and an uncle to Tommy. And so it was unimaginable to me that Tommy would be hurt because he was in the court system about 3 blocks away. Well, there came a time in the afternoon, I released my staff. I was told to report back to the White House. 5 of us returned to the White House. The president returned later to address the nation. I left the White House at midnight on the 11th, passed the Pentagon on fire to get to my home, came back on the next day on the 12th at 6 a.m., and the first thing I did was I told our chief of staff, Andy Card, that my nephew was still unresponsive. He was in the area. And the chief said, "Did you tell the president?" I said, "No, I think he's got enough going on." 2 minutes later, the president called me at my desk and said, "Andy just told me that your nephew's in that area. We're going to pray for him." And probably the first time he'd ever said this, he said, "We're going to find the people who did this and bring them to justice." And 2 minutes later, he was at my desk. And he said, "You tell your family, we're going to pray for Tommy, and we're going to find these people and bring them to justice." So I called my sister. And then later on that day, he called me up to the Oval, and he said, "Any news on your nephew?" I said, "No." And he said, "When do you think I should go to New York?" I said, "Well, you need to go right away, but you need to go differently than we normally go because it's a recovery site." So the Secret Service had to stand down. The president had to give that order. We had to take a smaller plane, a smaller footprint, no doing what the Secret Service normally does in sweeps and things like that. And what we saw was what you got, him standing on the rubble with a bullhorn, with a fireman.
That moment.
It was amazing. It was amazing. But in our country, we're so fortunate to have the right people at the right time in our country to lead us through these difficult times. And then it was only afterwards I learned that my nephew died saving people. He commandeered a jury van with supplies. Him and 2 of his buddies were killed, and he was told to leave. And his last transmission in his radio was, "I can't, people need my help." But that's America. That's what we do. So I have a unique perspective because I saw exactly firsthand what was going on. I was the only staff person who lost a nephew or a close family member. And then I went with the president to the Diamondbacks World Series game.
Game 3.
Game 3. And being from New York, I've seen politicians show up at games and they're booed right out.
Yeah.
The thunderous applause and the patriotism was not for President Bush. It was for our country.
Right.
He just had to be the beneficiary of being that leader in time. And he understands that full well, and his humility of what he represented that day, not only at home, but abroad.
I believe in divine intervention. I just do. And I the symbolism of that pitch right down the middle was just something that the world needed to see at that time. But the words he was given, it's interesting you talked about when he said to you, "We're going to pray for your family." My first time I met President Bush, he was here and he was receiving the endorsement for his reelection from the Carpenters Union. And I was just a guest. And so when he walked the line after the speech, I had promised my mother if I ever got in the same room with him, I would give him a picture of my brother.
Oh, that's fine.
So as he was coming down the line, I was at least had the sense to not try to shove something in his face. I said, "Can I hand you something, Mr. President?" And I handed it to him. I said, "Picture of my brother." And I had written his brother an email, being the governor of Florida, inviting him to an event. So Jeb passed my email on to the president, where I had said, I'm sure you're as proud of your brother as I am of mine. And President Bush sent me a handwritten letter. And so I reminded him about the letter.
Right.
And he stopped everything he was doing, and he said, "I remember that letter. How's your mom?" And he began to cry. He would tear up. Whether you agree with his politics or you don't, there was a genuine moment. And the first words he said to me after that, he took my hand and said, "We pray for your family." I just was moved by that. So I believe that there is that divine intervention, and the words he spoke seemed to be inspired, if that makes any sense.
Genuine.
Yes.
And that's what you have with the Bush family is the letter. His father was famous, and it's passed down through generations. It's leading by example. Is you take the time to thank people or to let them know you're in their thoughts. And what I did, correspondence was part of my portfolio at the White House. I always gave the president a sampling, uncensored, of what people were thinking. Because unless a president knows, other than what he's told, you can't grasp what's happening. So every week we would give him a sampling of what the people are saying on different issues. Not only are you doing a good job, but maybe there are things in there of criticism. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's what you need to do to be a good leader. Is you have to find out what is on people's minds, what is a legitimate concern, and how can we address it.
Well, in the presence of mind to understand that getting a note on a 5x7 piece of presidential cardstock, front and back, written by the president's hand, is something I'll cherish for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. That presence of mind in the midst of a reelection, in the midst of everything else he had going on, was an incredible thing for our family. And then the speech he gave to the joint session of Congress, where he said, "We will rally the world to our cause. We will not tire. We will not falter. We will not fail." That moment, watching that speech, I thought, this is taking the worst tragedy in our nation's history, and this nation seemed to be so unified.
Right. Well, that's what our adversaries, our enemies, don't get.
Right.
They think our internal division is so systemic that we are on the brink. We're not on the brink. We're not even close.
No.
And all they have to do is test us, and they'll get exactly what they deserve. And that's what a lot of our adversaries and enemies just don't understand, is what you see in our country may be to the outsider beyond the pale, but it really isn't. Our core values are still there. And that's why I love to travel our nation and to get outside of Washington and listen to people, their concerns, and how proud they are of their country. We live in the greatest, freest, best nation in the world. I've been to the best countries. I've been to the poorest countries. There's no place like the United States. There just isn't.
Of everything here on this bio of yours, if you look at the totality of what you've done, is there an accomplishment? Is there something? Is it Tunnel to Towers? Is it something that you're doing or have done that you look at and it's for you the most satisfying?
The most satisfying, life is a series of adventures. So I've loved all my adventures, and I've been very fortunate to have the adventures I've been given. So everyone has a unique perspective and has had an imprint in me and on me. Right now, the work I do with Tunnel to Towers, because now I'm at the point in my career, my political career and my professional career is pretty much over. It's the charitable work, and it's giving back, and it's helping those who are the most in need, and doing it in a way that is deserving and respectful. We've had to overcome the stigma of homelessness amongst our veterans.
Yeah.
What's hurt me is the fact that there have been some municipalities who didn't want us and tried to thwart our ability to be in their communities. And, the fact is, when we do something, if I wouldn't live there, if you wouldn't live there, we're not putting anybody else there. our residents, our heroes bring up communities. They don't bring them down.
Right.
And we're not going to be building a home for one of our heroes in an area that I wouldn't live in. And I want them to be able to walk to church and go to the bank and assimilate into the community. I want them to go back into the community. And I want them to be proud of where they live. And Frank Slur does, our CEO, our board, and most importantly, our donors, the ones who give us the ability to do the good work we do. They expect that, and we will never let them down.
Yeah, and it's one of the privileges of living in Arizona is we have got such a robust veteran community, and they are there for each other. They're there for the rest of the community. Right. And one of the most significant things about a veteran is they have no expectations that they are owed anything.
100%.
When most of us feel like we owe them a huge debt,
yeah.
They don't even want to be thanked or recognized.
Right.
But there are so many of them around us that make this community such a great place.
Right. And in many instances, they don't even know the entitlements they're entitled to,
right.
that they earned.
Right.
So that's where we have a national case management network, too. We physically don't have to be in a place to help a hero. You call into Tunnel to Towers, you're going to get the help you need if we can deliver it. So, a veteran told me 6 months ago, and it really brought things home. He said, "Sir, when we serve, it's nobody left behind. Yet when we separate, it's every man and woman for themselves." That shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be.
Should not be in America.
We obviously have a friend in common in Gordon and Lisa James.
Oh, yeah.
And I was so excited to meet you, and I'm even more happy that we've had this time to talk to each other. And I thank you so much for taking the time to do this, because the point of this podcast is Arizona stories that people don't know. And the fact that you're in this community now and have done so much for your country, it's an honor to talk with you.
Thank you.
Once again, it's another episode of Amazing Arizonans, and I hope you'll check out all of our other episodes. Thanks for watching this one.
Thanks for watching Amazing Arizonans, presented by Resolution Copper. Tap the button in the middle to subscribe to KTAR News.